It all started on a rainy evening in Portland, Oregon. The storm had rolled in suddenly, covering the city in thick gray clouds and pelting rain against the windows of my apartment. I had just returned from work, exhausted and ready to spend the evening catching up on some reading, when my phone buzzed with a message from my friend Claire. "Can you come over? It's important. Bring an umbrella." Claire wasn't the type to send mysterious messages. Usually, she was straightforward, lighthearted, and even a little sarcastic. But this message carried a tone of urgency that immediately caught my attention. I grabbed my coat, my umbrella, and headed out into the storm. Claire lived only a few blocks away in an old Victorian house that her family had owned for generations. I had been there countless times before, and I always admired the creaky wood floors, the antique furniture, and the grand staircase that led to the upstairs bedrooms. Tonight, however, something about the house seemed different. The moment I stepped onto the porch, I noticed that the lights inside flickered faintly, as if struggling to stay alive. When I rang the bell, the sound echoed through the house in a way that felt unusually hollow. Claire opened the door almost instantly, as though she had been standing just behind it, waiting. Her eyes darted nervously behind me, scanning the street before she quickly ushered me inside. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the storm. "What's going on?" I asked, dripping rain onto the mat. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she locked the door, slid the chain into place, and pulled the curtains closed. That's when I realized her hands were trembling. "Claire," I said more firmly, "you're scaring me." "What happened?" She took a deep breath, glanced toward the staircase, and then motioned for me to follow her into the living room. The old chandelier above flickered again as thunder rumbled outside. "I found something," she finally said. "Upstairs. In the attic." "What did you find?" She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line as though she wasn't sure whether to say it out loud. Then, without warning, she stood up and hurried toward the staircase. "Wait here," she told me. I started to protest, but she was already climbing the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the quiet house. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my heart thudding against my ribs as the storm grew louder. A few minutes later, I heard her descending slowly. When she appeared, my breath caught in my throat. She was holding a glass jar. Inside the jar was something that looked like folded pieces of parchment, aged and yellowed with time. The jar itself was sealed tight, its lid rusty and worn as though it hadn't been opened in decades. "I found this hidden under the floorboards," she said, her voice shaking. "It was buried beneath a loose plank in the attic. I think it belonged to my grandmother." The jar looked harmless enough, but the way she held it, as though it might explode, sent chills down my spine. "What's in it?" I asked. "That's just it," she said. "I don't know. But whatever it is, my grandmother didn't want anyone to find it." We sat in silence for a moment, the jar resting on the coffee table between us. The storm outside battered the windows, and the shadows in the room seemed to grow darker. Finally, I reached out. "Should we open it?" Claire grabbed my wrist. "No, not yet. You don't understand." Her grip was so tight it startled me. I looked into her eyes, and for the first time, I saw fear there. Not the ordinary kind of fear, but something deeper. "What do you mean?" I asked. She glanced around the room, as if making sure no one else was listening. "Before she passed away, my grandmother told me never to go into the attic. She said the attic kept secrets that were too dangerous to uncover." I thought she was just being superstitious. But now, she looked at the jar again, her voice trailing off. The air between us seemed heavy. My curiosity gnawed at me, but so did a growing sense of unease. "Claire," I said carefully, "it could just be old letters. Maybe she was hiding family memories." Claire shook her head. "No, you don't know her like I did. She wasn't the type to keep sentimental things. She kept warnings. Warnings no one believed." As if on cue, the lights flickered violently before plunging us into momentary darkness. Claire gasped and clutched the jar closer to her chest until the light sputtered back to life. That was when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the side of the jar, etched faintly into the glass, were small markings. They looked almost like symbols, carved with care but worn down with age. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Claire nodded slowly. That's why I called you. You've studied symbols. You'd know if this means something. I leaned in closer. The markings were faint, but recognizable. They weren't just scratches. They were sigils, symbols often associated with protection, secrecy, or warnings. My pulse quickened. This isn't just a jar, I said. Someone sealed it. On purpose. Claire's eyes widened. Then maybe we shouldn't open it. But even as she said it, I could tell she was torn between fear and curiosity. And truthfully, so was I. We sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the jar while the storm raged outside. Finally, I broke the silence. If your grandmother wanted to protect you, maybe we should respect that. But if this contains answers, truths about your family, don't you deserve to know? She didn't respond. Instead, she reached for the jar and placed it gently back into my hands. Then you open it, she said. I froze. My fingers tightened around the cool glass. The markings seemed to pulse faintly under the flickering light. I swallowed hard, wondering what secrets could be locked away inside. And that's when the sound came. From upstairs. A loud, dragging noise. Both of us jumped to our feet, our eyes locked on the staircase. Neither of us moved for a long moment, too paralyzed to speak. The noise came again, slow, heavy, deliberate. Is anyone else here? I whispered. Claire shook her head. Her face had gone pale. The jar in my hands suddenly felt heavier, as though the weight of whatever was inside it was tied directly to the sound above. At that moment, I realized something terrifying. The attic wasn't as empty as we thought. And maybe, just maybe, the jar wasn't meant to be opened at all.